So, what have I been reading up on this week? Matthew Hopkins. He was the real Witchfinder General. So, the legend and hopefully reality of England's notorious Witchfinder, who was characterising the Witchfinder General by Vincent Price. Now, I think some lives and figures from history have become manufactured or exaggerated, and it's become accepted as truth. But the notorious Witchfinder General, the enigmatic Matthew Hopkins, was as bad as he was painted. He was born in 1620, and his witch hunting career flourished during the English Civil War. And he began his witch finding career in 1645 with an assistant, John Stern, who was 10 years his junior. He was a landowner from Lawshall near Bury St Edmunds. Now, Matthew Hopkins was a lawyer from East Anglia originally, and he claimed to hold the office of Witchfinder General, although the title was never bestowed by Parliament, and he is believed to have been responsible for the deaths of between 300 to 400 women over just 2 years. And that's more than a third of the total number of executions in 2 centuries of English witch hunting. He's also rumoured to have had 68 people put to death in Bury St Edmunds and 19 hanged at Chelmsford in a single day. Now, this witch hunter is still very much remembered with horror, but he could not have carried out these persecutions without the active cooperation of the local population, it must be said. Now, apparently Hopkins began his career as a witch finder after he overheard a woman discussing the meeting with the devil in March 1644, and as a result of that, 23 women were accused of witchcraft and were tried at Chelmsford in 1645. 4 of them died in prison and 19 were convicted and hanged. It's a mass murder, isn't it? Hopkins and Stern extracted confessions using methods such as sleep deprivation, being walked up and down in a cell for 5 days and nights without any rest, which would make most people confess to anything. And once he swore on oath that 4 familiars, a white dog, a greyhound, a polecat and a black imp, had visited Elizabeth Clark in her cell, and she did not deny the charge. She even confessed to having slept with the devil. And basically it's psychological torture, isn't it? Or alternatively, they used what they called the swimming test, where those who floated were declared witches and those who died were innocent. But Hopkins was warned against the use of the swimming technique without receiving the victim's permission first. So this led to the legal abandonment of the test by 1645. He was going to agree to that. Hopkins also believed that witches fed their familiars with their own blood, so concluded that keeping witches under guard would ensure that a familiar could not feed from the witch, thereby depriving the witches of their magical capabilities. Now, this torturous pair also looked for the devil's mark, usually a mole, birthmark or even an extra nipple, and if no such marks were visible, then the accused were pricked with knives or special needles to find invisible ones, usually after the suspect had been shaved of all body hair. Just humiliation, isn't it? But what the onlookers didn't realise was that the needles were often retractable into spring-loaded handles. Now, Hopkins and Stern, accompanied by the women who performed the pricking, were soon travelling over eastern England, claiming to be officially commissioned by Parliament to uncover and prosecute witches. Now, the pair and the female assistants were paid well for their work, and it's possible that was the prime motivation for their actions. Now, the main aim of the work of Hopkins and his gruesome gang was not necessarily to prove any of the accused had committed acts of sorcery, but to prove that they had made a covenant with the devil, because the devil was not going to confess, was he? So it was necessary to gain the confession from a human involved. Now, as Hopkins operated mainly in the counties of Suffolk, Essex and Norfolk, both men would have required some sort of letter of safe conduct to be able to travel through the counties mentioned due to strong Puritan and parliamentarian influences. And Hopkins claimed he only charged 20 shillings a town for his services, but records at Stowmarket show their costs charged to the town to have been £23 plus his travelling expenses, which is equivalent to 4,700 today. Now, Hopkins and his bad company of followers quickly ran into opposition not long after their work began. One of his main antagonists was John Gall, who was a vicar in Huntingdonshire, and he began a programme of Sunday sermons to suppress witch hunting. And eventually in Norfolk, both Hopkins and Stern were questioned by the law about the torturing and fees he was charging, and there was also asked if the methods of investigation did not make them, the finders themselves, witches, and if with all his knowledge did he not have a secret also, or had he used unlawful courses of torture. But lucky for them, by the time this court session resumed in 1647, Stern and Hopkins had retired, but his career came to a full end when he died at his home in Manningtree in Essex in August 1647. Now legend has it that he was subject to his own swimming test and executed as a witch. That would have been real life karma, wouldn't it? And there is an incident written by a 19th century writer of Essex folklore suggests that Hopkins was himself accused of being a witch, and he states that Matthew Hopkins was charged with stealing a book containing a list of all the witches of England, which he had presumably obtained by employing sorcery. Now obviously he declared his innocence, but an angry mob forced him to undergo his own swimming test. Some accounts say he drowned, while others say he floated and was thus condemned to be hanged, but there are no records of his trial as existing. Another local legend has it that Matthew Hopkins' ghost haunts Missley Pond, describing an apparition wearing 17th century clothes seen roving the locality. And there's also been reports of Matthew Hopkins' ghost haunting the White Horse Inn in Missley, but the parish registry at the Church of St Mary, Missley Heath, confirms he was interred there, so it's a bit vague. Now, Hopkins' witch hunting methods were described in his book The Discovery of Witches, published in 1647, and the year following the publication of his book, witch trials began in New England, with the hanging of Elsie Young in Connecticut, followed by the conviction of Margaret Jones. Now, apparently the evidence assembled against Margaret Jones was gathered by the use of Hopkins' techniques of searching and watching. Now, these first executions involving a witch hunt lasted from 1648 until 1663. About 80 people throughout New England were accused of practicing witchcraft during this period, and 15 women and 2 men were executed. And some of Hopkins' methods were employed during the most famous witch hunts in the world, the Salem witch trials, which occurred in, I think it was 1692-93. This resulted in 19 executions for witchcraft, and 1 man was pressed to death for refusing to plead, and there was 150 imprisonments. Whatever the truth is of Hopkins' death, he was a controversial figure even in his own time, and he and other witch hunters were able to carry out their work with impunity during the chaos of the English Civil War. Now, Hopkins' life acquired an evil reputation, and has been described as an anti-hero and a bogeyman. But if he was subject to his own design swimming test and executed as a witch, I would say justice has been served. Now, as to John Sternham, he retired and wrote a book, and history seems to have forgotten the horrors that he was implicit with.